Morning all. I had an interesting game last night in the North Circular League. Barnet were away against Chingford Chess Club, and my good friend Kostas Karianis is the captain at the moment, and they had an incredibly strong team. On board one, they brought Moscovich, who's over 210, and on board two there was Bob Eames, FIDE master Bob Eames, who's about 210 as well, and Kostas on board three. It was a very strong match, 6-board match. So I was on board two, playing Bob, who I've played a few times before. He's a really nice guy, and I really like his style of chess, very aggressive and exciting. So let's see, I played knight f3, trying to avoid mainline opening for or anything too technical in the opening. I just wanted to reach a reasonable position, so kind of quiet fianchetto system. But f5 is an aggressive move here, and black has a bit of a worrying plan as far as I was concerned coming up. So here, after knight f6, I just castle. I thought, you know, maybe fianchetto, but this is interesting as well. Bishop e7. Okay, so I played c4. After castles, I played knight c3, and okay, now queen e8, and there's a bit of a concern, this kind of hack attack coming at me, for example, like this. And I usually like playing such attacks myself, so I was wondering, how do I interfere with this attack? Especially this knight could be a nuisance with knight g4s later. So I thought one thing is that I've got an opportunity here to at least play knight d5. I'll play that, because even though if he doubles the pawns, I thought, well, you know, some c-file pressure, and I get rid of this attacking knight. So that seemed quite a logical move. Actually, it has been played a few times before in this position, knight d5. If I was just quick reference check, it's got a 40% success rate. Virginian is one of the exponents of this. Knight d5 against Lobron. Actually, he lost in 1997. That wasn't particularly successful in 1997 against Lobron. So I don't know, maybe it's kind of a tricky position. In fact, there's more black wins than white wins there on my reference database, which is a bit of a concern for the system as a whole. So anyway, knight d5, he took c takes, and now queen h5, so carry on this kind of worrying plan that perhaps f4 later, and even, you know, if that shields h6, then maybe even bishop h3 and just using the rook, or alternatively just getting this knight on board. But actually this knight has a special purpose in this position, which may be to block the c-file, as we're about to see. But first, queen b3 also interferes a bit with black, his plans, because knight takes e5 might be threatened now, and d6. So he spends a move getting away from that diagonal. And I thought, okay, that position's not too bad against my FIDE master opponent. So I play actually bishop d2, which might not be such a critical approach here, because black perhaps would ideally like to block up this c-file, perhaps, and so if there is going to be a knight on c5, maybe being able to play b4 at some point is useful, and therefore a move like queen c4, I think this has been played before. Queen c4 makes some sense, and this has been played before by a fairly low rated player, Trasker 2198, but he beat at 2292 in this in 2002. He continued with b4 here after knight a6, b4, and you see that black hasn't got such a blockade on with a blockading knight, and white might look forward perhaps to bishop b2 later, and it doesn't look that unpleasant to have this c-file. So okay, so anyway, bishop d2, and I had in mind a kind of tactical positional idea that after knight d7, rook ac1, I might be tempted for something quite interesting, namely the potential for an exchange sack to win this centre pawn. So for the moment he doesn't actually play knight c5, he plays bishop d8, and I think I start going a little bit wrong here. I think this is not a particularly good move here. I blundered tactically, and I think that's one of the themes of this game. I'm trying to think positionally, but I keep blundering tactically, or if I'm thinking tactically, you blunder positionally. And what I wanted to waffle on about in this game as an example is how the thinking method you use has kind of inherent weakness with that thinking method. Whatever you use, it's got weakness. Therefore, you've got to bring like strategic thinking together with tactical thinking. You know, the two different approaches: the overall position versus specific details, for example. So the inherent thinking weaknesses here are revealed, or are starting to be revealed already. That E4, I'm optimistically thinking F4 D4. That's what I'm thinking. But of course, there's a tactical problem here with E4. It's a blunder here, but we'll check in the second pass. But it is actually a tactical blunder. I believe here he could play F takes, which protects E5, and so in this position, for example, this rook C5 doesn't win the centre pawn, so that wouldn't be very pleasant. So for some reason, well, I think in this position he might be concerned about Queen E3, which does satisfy that requirement to hold F3 and E4. Okay, so that's why I think this move order was played Knight C5, which does actually seem to allow seemingly tempting exchange sack. But of course there is still the problem, which I had regret during the game that I have blundered, because of course the queen is on E5. So here it's only an exchange for not a pawn, and this is a very strange episode now. After bishop C3, you know, he could just, okay, his next move, bishop F6, forces me to do something with this knight, and I play this move F4, which is reinforcing the knight. And tactically, I think he goes slightly wrong. That actually black can just take on F3 to help undermine white's position. For example, bishop takes, queen H6 now threatens bishop takes, queen E3 check. So I think tactically he goes wrong, as well as positionally with this next move. He plays actually bishop H3 to my shock and horror, and delight. Actually, not shock and delight, really, not shock and horror, because now I just forcibly get a good position. I just take on H3, take on E4. I've got an exchange. Okay, for the exchange down, I've got a pawn, and actually this is okay. After rook A E8, I'm thinking, all right, was this the tactical point? There's like a trap here on F1 now. That bishop E5, rook E5. So I've got a bit of tactical thinking, and I'm thinking, okay, I need to safeguard F1 and E4, and this next move satisfies that requirement, just protecting F1. So far so good. And also any B5, you know, queen C5 will not F8, so he can't really, you know, go too adventurous here, for example. You know, using this rook zone to take on F8. So there's no real problem here, it seems, with the position. And actually he plays B6, and I think I'm doing very well here, objectively. But now this comes into inherent weaknesses with a particular type of thinking. Because recently I've been questioning, you know, what is this idea of strategic crush, and I thought it's to do with, you know, actually looking back at examples to try and be independent of tactical resources, but actually I think just as importantly as the tactics is the skeleton, as pawns are the soul of chess. So what can happen from a skeleton perspective? If we look at a skeleton perspective, pawn structure, what could happen here which would be bad for both sides? I mean, you could look at tactical resources, and you might think, okay, these pawns would be good, and it would be good to get this pawn to E7, and so this next move might be tempting, knight C6. Well, that's how I thought, you know, the position that I could get my pawn to E7, so knight C6 would be interesting. But if we look from a skeletal perspective, because that's from a kind of to try and squash tactical resources, in particular, the rook coming here, being able to play the pawn to e7. It's from a tactical perspective, but from a skeletal perspective, if we look at this position, which is a different type of thinking, we see that white's opportunity from a skeleton perspective in this position is actually to kind of try and undermine the structure over here with, for example, b4, if white can get away with that. And for example, taking here, I can get away with this just about, because I'm on f8, and this will be kind of good exposing c7 potentially. And maybe check that more in the second pass. But from a skeletal perspective, white has b4. That's the underminable kind of pawn here, and white has f4, which can be potentially undermined by g5. Of course, it looks very unlikely at the moment because the king's on h8, so that's kind of obscured that strategic break. So the notion of strategic crush here, my actual notion, I think, of strategic crush has an inherent weakness, because I'm thinking about the tactical aspects here, whilst in fact there's a strategic aspect to factor in. I know this pawn's kind of shielded by the knight, but this pawn can be potentially undermined with g5. And so if you look at that skeletal perspective here, there's this question of knight c6 versus knight f3, which comes to this notion of strategic crush, because actually knight f3, if we look at knight f3, it looks like it's kind of prophylaxis against any g5s in the future. Even if black took, takes, g5 is prevented, so it's kind of more prophylaxis against skeletal concerns. This is more against tactical concerns, and both moves of course liberate the e pawn, which seems promising. But here I was kind of concerned, let's see, in this position after knight c6, I didn't really factor in g5 coming at me that strongly here at all, probably because the king's on h8. It's kind of hidden strategic break in the position, strategic break in the position. So I played knight c6, and I think there was this concern here that any e5s, they would have queen f5 and g5. I think I started to see that would be a concern around about here after taking, and during his thinking time. Well, no, actually, after this next move, you see, my queen can't easily get to c3 now to use this diagonal, which would have been useful. He plays now the move g5. So this is an important skeletal kind of break, strategic break, which I think ideally this notion of strategic crush has to link with pawn structure first, because strategy is the slow aspects position. It's nice to be thinking to squash tactical resources as well. I think what's happening on pawn structure is creates the roads, for the pieces. The pieces work around the pawns, the skeleton of the position, and this is quite good. This g5 here, it would seem, because it's undermining my structure. And for example, if I took, you could take it and take on e4. So it's, and I'm tempted for a huge blunder in this position, which I go straight into. In this position, oh dear, white to play and go from having a reasonable position, not as good as if g5 had been prevented. So it's only a reasonable position here. It's not a winning position or anything. It's not a great position. There's not even an advantage, I think, for white anymore. It's just a reasonable position. But white to play and lose, get a losing position on the spot. I wonder if you can spot when I played which white to play and get a lost position, and it seems potentially tempting. So if I give you 10 seconds, can you spot the blunder and why it's a blunder? If you want to pause the video here. Okay, now what I should have played was perhaps e5, and accept the look of this kind of blockade position. I know pawn's blocked, but the knight is holding e5, and there might be still some reasonable prospects here for white, because the knight is keeping, for example, the rook out of d8 as mentioned before. But actually, I played f5, and to my horror, queen. There's a queen move, which is a real crusher here. Can you spot what black plays in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, he plays queen g4, so he's on e4, and the unfortunate thing here is if I try and defend e4 as I did, and I saw this coming, of course, what does black play here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, rook takes f5. He's just exploiting the loose queen, and it's a bit over, really. It's a very, very difficult position to play. And the game carried on a little bit. Queen d3, the queens came off. He let me get a couple of pawns, which seems at first sight promising, but his rooks are really active, and he's got this passed c pawn here, and this rook could potentially come down as well. So it's a pretty hopeless position actually here. I did get to threaten mate of one though. So check. It's pretty hopeless here, because now this rook a7 is coming in. These pawns are just immobilized, really. This is all pretty desperate now. Rook d2 it's all over. It's threatening mate as well as the pawn. I'll try this, thinking the knight might potentially come round optimistically, but it's all over. I resign here. So what I took from this game, well, at the moment, is I think my very notion of strategic crush was focused around prevention of tactical resources, whilst in fact I think it needs to also be geared against the opponent's strategic breaks. I completely missed g5 coming up. Obviously the prelude makes it a little bit hidden in a position that bishop takes c3 first and then g5, but as far as white's strategic breaks, also b4 conversely would have perhaps given white an advantage, and we'll put a Qb3 on this second pass. That's, I think I was doing okay here, except e4 is a blunder already. And if we did just check this line to prove that this isn't ideal, queen e3, bishop g4, and this is what we saw after. Okay, actually there's rook c3 now. Okay, but still black's got that lovely blockade on the c file, and has achieved his objective dynamically, this f file blocking the c file. So I think overall, well, the engine likes black here, this position. It looks as though black's got a lot of the pressure, and it's an uncomfortable position. It's passive fundamentally. And can black even play c6 to liberate the bishop to b6 potentially? And there's an exchange that I mentioned here. I'm not sure what that does. Exchange for a pawn there. Similarly, quite unconvincing in some respects. But so, okay, e4 wasn't a good move. Maybe something like e3 just to prevent f4 is like a strategic break, and white maybe is okay here as well. If knight c5, the exchange sack here might be better than the game. At least there's no f4 because it's just take. The exchange sack here is more palatable for that centre pawn. It's clearer, and again, this break now, with this breaking down these double pawns, might be useful to try and get some exploitable weakness going, rather than let's see, say d4, and there's access now to c7, so more exploitable weakness, potentially f4, and this sort of position is going to be quite promising. So the strategic breaks, as far as strategic crush, the notion of strategic crush, for white it was b4, and for black it's potentially g5, the way I played it. But here, g5 doesn't seem at all that useful. But let's go back in the game. So this was quite loosening e4, and for king actually about e5. So I don't know, wasn't really with it that much. So so knight takes e5, and of course this has gone a bit pear-shaped. Black's better, bishop f6. Black's actually better here, and I'm just let off the hook here. E takes f3 is actually a crushing move. E takes d3 is not so crushing apparently. If I get time to reinforce e5, but it's obviously black could do this as well. It's nice for black. I'm just the exchange down. I think there was a concern we both sort of miscalculated that on this position. I think we were both looking at queen e8 for some reason, rook e1. But of course here, pardon me, here queen h6 is a very powerful move in the position. Forget queen e8, queen h6. It actually threatens now bishop e5 and queen e3. So that's a real crushing move. So just the exchange up for not much at all. So I was let off the hook, admittedly, to be given this opportunity of the bishop h3 for this nice pawn center. And technically, yeah, I'm doing okay. And this is actually a good move, queen c4. I think it might be better than queen d1. If I played queen d1, is that actually a blunder? It seems to be okay as well, potentially. In fact, there's a tactical move, knight d3 here to support, because there's knight f2, isn't there? So if it takes, there's knight f2 on rook e4, which would be okay for white. But yeah, queen c4, good move, and doing okay. But this is interesting. This shows kind of weakness in actually my very notion of strategic crush, because my notion was about preventing tactical resources. I was trying to more clearly define what a strategic crush, but I think the prevention of strategic breaks, as well as inflicting your own strategic breaks, so b4 versus g5 here is the critical skeletal concerns, pawn structure concerns, which really create a lot of fundamental implications, like c7 being vulnerable, or f4 being vulnerable, or f1 being vulnerable. From white's point of view, c7. From black's point of view, f4 or e5 being undermined, or f1. And so if g5 is really important for black, then white has two ways of playing it: either to inflict one's own structural break, or prevent the opponent's structural break in this position. So knight f3 is good prophylaxis against g5, and still there's potential mobile pawn mass in the centre is a bit of a concern for black. But black, as soon as e5 is going to be played, black's going to get this f5 blockade. That did concern me pretty shortly. Well, in this position here, in fact, after g5, I was thinking e5. There's queen f5, or even g takes here. I mean, maybe this is dangerous. It's this strategic break g5 has created opportunities for black. But let's go with, say, rook takes f4, queen h5. There's opportunities on this h file and around here. So this is probably about equal, objectively. Even though the pawns look initially attractive, they will take some time to get down to e7. But this knight c6 was based on tactical resource independence, about the rooks not being able to use, say, d8, not against the strategic break. And this is the outcome, that actually the strategic break, as with many strategic breaks, gives the pieces great opportunities. And black is very active here. It's been inflicted in this position, with e5 being the lesser evil, but f5 actually being outright losing, absolutely losing tactically to a basic forcing move, followed by using this newly created pin on this loose queen. And okay, I just thought, yeah, is it because I missed forcing moves? I was thinking about this blockade rather than, and I chose an even worse idea, just lose tactically, basically. So that's a shame. But I think there's something to be learned with all these experiences, that chess is a very hard game, and the kind of thinking concept one uses has its own inherent weaknesses. So somehow, I think it's always good to look at strategy and tactics together. And if you're looking at preventing resources, tactical resources, also look at, for example, preventing strategic breaks. I think they go hand in hand. The skeleton and the pieces work around the skeleton. And okay, here black's just winning now. There's no point checking the rest of that. So that really, the action happened there. That earlier, I think this reflects a key moment to do with strategic breaks versus the tactics. But I've got potentially good pawn mass, so b4 as well here would be quite interesting. This position, for example, as long as rook e5 is being prevented. Let's have a look at this. I can get access to c7 now, and this passed pawn got pawn mobility, and there's some prospects. As long as I'm not getting tactically blown away, and of course g5 is absolutely prevented here. So there's prospects. So that's a shame, but there's a bit of a harsh lesson there. And okay, hope you got something from it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.